Hello and welcome to this video. My name's David Thorne. In this video I'm going to give you a introduction, a walkthrough, talkthrough, an explanation about Nginx. Now if you've never used Nginx before and this is the first time that you want to install it and use it, I'm going to give you a really good introduction of where all the files are, what you've got to do, how you get it up and running, how you add another site, how you listen on a different port. Basically just a quick crash course into using Nginx. With that said, let's get started. So right now, as you can see, we've got a, I'm logged in as David at Debian 4. This is a Debian 4 machine, nothing special. Debian 12, it's all been updated and so on. So if you're running any Ubuntu or anything like that, then all of these commands are going to work on here. But that's not the point of the tutorial here. So the first thing we've got to do is we have to install Nginx. And we can see whether it's installed already by using app list Nginx. And if it is installed, it will say in square brackets installed afterwards. So let's just go ahead and install it. So let's just say app install Nginx. We're using sudo because I'm using my user rather than root user. And as you can see here, it's asking us whether we want to install this amount of kilobytes and so on. And it's going to install Nginx and Nginx Common. All right, so let's just go ahead and say yes. And this will quickly go off and download and install all of the relevant packages and create all of the relevant files. So let's just clear this. And now we can say where is Nginx, for example, and it's going to now tell you where all the different files are that you need. Now, the most important directory that we need to look at is this etc Nginx folder. You can literally ignore these other files and folders. All right. So now if we go and run once again this sudo app list Nginx, you can now see that it says in square brackets installed, which is really good because it allows you to come to a machine to see whether you want to install it or whether it is or isn't installed. So just for the sake of showing you how to now remove it completely, because it's all well and good installing it, but what if there's an old version of Nginx on there and you want to be able to install another version, right? Or you want to be able to reset and start again. So what you can do is sudo apt and then auto remove and then just say purge and then say Nginx. And this is literally going to wipe everything off again that has anything to do with Nginx. It's going to remove the binaries, the dependencies, configuration files, you name it, it's going to remove everything. So if we go ahead and now run app list Nginx once again, you can see it's not installed. And if we now say where is Nginx, there's no more of those configuration files or binaries whatsoever. So it's completely gone. All right, so let's go back and install it once again. Well, I think it's important to be able to understand how to install and deinstall, remove and something, to be able to do the reverse of what you just did. Okay, now that we've done that, Nginx is going to be listening on port 80 by default. So let's go and see how you can debug to see whether or not Nginx is running. So we can say here, there are a few ways of doing this, but we're going to say etc init.d Nginx status, and this is going to tell us the status. And as you can see, it's active and it's running. All right. Now, if we can see, this is the most important command. You can see here that it's running Nginx and so on. Okay. Now, if you want to be able to see which port it's running on, you need a tool called netstat. That's not installed right now, but we can install it by using net tools. And once we've got net tools installed, we can then use netstat tuple, and we can see here that it's installed on port 80, right? Or it's listening on port 80, and we can also see that SSH is running on port 22. That said, with the ports, before you start running and installing or configuring your website using Nginx, and then you say, why isn't it running? It's not happening. It's because the firewall. You need to check the firewall. Now, I always close down firewalls to all incoming or outgoing requests just by default because it's safe. And as you can see here, if we use UFW to check our firewall, we can see that I'm denying all incoming requests. I'm allowing all outgoing requests, but by default, the only open port is port 22, and that's for SSH. So you will need to open the port up to be able to talk to this one server, this Nginx, from the outside. With that said, let's go ahead and do that. And we can say sudo UFW allow, and we're going to say 80 on TCP. All right. And if we run the request once again, you can now see that it's running on port 80. All right. And if we want to then debug this to see whether or not our Nginx server is actually delivering anything, we need curl installed. It's not installed on here right now. So we're just going to say app sudo app install curl and then -y to make it a little bit quicker. And once that's installed, we can now say basically curl localhost, and we see the default welcome to Nginx web page that it delivers to us. All right, so this is basically, you've just installed it, and how can you debug that everything's working? These are the steps. All right, you don't need to know anything more than this. This is enough. And if we come to another machine, then we'll be able to speak to it from outside. But right now, we just care about how we can configure it from inside. And you can trust me right now that you can access this machine externally and you will get exactly the same information. So now let's have a look at where the configuration files are located. So let's just change into the etc nginx directory, and we can see here that we've got the conf.d directory, and we've got file CGI, which we're going to ignore for now, and we've got some other files, and we've got mods enabled and available and so on, which we're going to ignore, and we've got sites available and enabled. These two folders here and this one file here for the time being are the only ones that we're really going to concentrate on. So let's have a quick peek look into nginx.conf. all right. And this is really the main file that you need to look at first. All right. And if you come down to the bottom here, you'll see include, two includes, and it says include etc nginx conf.d, and it's got star and conf. And then underneath it, it says then sites enabled and then star. What this is saying is that it's going to look inside the conf.d directory and load all files ending in .conf. And also it's going to load all files in sites enabled, and that includes any symbolic links and so on. So these are the two directories that you need to look to see which sites are actually being running, or which configurations, server configurations, have actually been running. Now, most of the rest of the information here in the beginning you don't need to worry about, all right, because you don't really need to change this file really at all unless you want to start configuring Nginx in a little bit more of an intermediate advanced way. But for the time being, I just want you to know that those files are there and this is where they are loaded. So let's go now into sites available, and you can see that there's one file default, and we said that in sites enabled, this is the file that the nginx.conf is loading. And as you can see here, this default is a symbolic link to the default file in sites available. And if we open this up, we can see that it's got a default configuration here with all of the different things in it. Now, I don't want you to look at this too much because we're actually going to delete this file in a second, and I'm gonna show you how to do this yourself. All right. So let's come back out of this, and let's I'm gonna stop doing this, and that there. Now we've got that working. Okay, I like saying LL rather than doing this. Okay, so now all right, so now let's completely remove these two directories, right? And now they're gone, and let's come back into our nginx conf file, and we're going to come down to the bottom where these files were, and we're going to get rid of that sites enabled, and we're just going to save this here, which this allows us now to come into the conf.d directory and basically add one of our configuration files. Now, before we do that, we're going to tell Nginx, hey, reload everything, please, restart. And so we're going to need to say sudo, and then we're going to come into this directory, and we're going to say Nginx, and then we're going to say then restart. And everything's restarted. Now, if we say curl localhost once again, you can see that it's getting an error here because nothing is listening on port 80, right? So it couldn't connect to anything because we removed everything. So let's now move back into the conf.d directory. And from here, we're going to create our conf file. So let's just say default.conf file. Remember, it's going to load all .conf files in this directory. So now that we've opened this, and we need to make sure that you open it as sudo, all right? Otherwise, you're going to add all your lines and then you're not going to be able to save it because it's read-only. So it's really important you remember to save it as sudo, or open it up as sudo. And the block that we need to do is create a server block, all right? And this is the most important thing. All of your configurations need to be inside of this server block because that's where it's being loaded. If you want to add any higher level configurations to it, then you can do. But this is not part of this one video, so we're just gonna skip over that. And now that we've opened this server block, we need to tell it, hey, which port do you want it to listen on to? And by default, it listens to port 80 anyway, but it's just good practice to put the listen inside of that one server block. Now, this is going to say, hey, listen on port 80. And we're going to come back to this shortly. And we're also going to say, hey, that the server name that you should be listening to, for the time being, we're just going to say localhost. Now, you could do something else, but we're going to come back to it again. Now we need to tell Nginx which folder to look in for all of our files by default, all right? And we set it by root, and we're going to say we're going to tell it to look in the var www folder, and then inside the HTML folder. And this is the default folder that it would have anyway. And so when you install Nginx, this folder and a file inside it is going to be created. We're also going to tell it, by default, if it's a folder that we're looking at, I want you to look at which index file to be used first. Now, you can list as many as you want here, but I'd much prefer to say, hey, if it's a folder that you want to access, look to see whether there's an index.html file in it first. And then you could say, check to see whether there's an index.php file in it afterwards. And you could say then, for like old legacy, index.htm. And if not, then =404 just says, hey, otherwise show me a not found page on it. But what we're going to do is we're just going to bring it back to index.html, and that's it. Now let's save this, and then we can say sudo and then -t, and -t is going to say, hey, test all of my configuration files for me and see what it says. And see what happens. And it says here the configuration file nginx conf syntax is okay, and everything seems to be okay. So now we can say -e or -s, and this is going to say, hey, which signal should I give Nginx? And we're going to say reload, all right? We're not going to say restart. We're just going to say, hey, reload all of the configuration files. And it has now reloaded. And if we say curl localhost once again, we get forbidden. Now, the question is why? Well, if we move over to the var www directory, and then to the HTML folder, this has been created by default. And now if we look in here, you can see there's an index.nginx-debian.html. Now, this is important to go back to the index file that we just talked about previously. If we now touch, let's say we do vim index.html, and we'll say hello world in here, and then we'll close this one file. And now let's run the curl request once again. Now you can see we get hello world. Now let's create a HTML file, right? And say hello world from legacy HTML. Whoops, let's from HTML. And now let's come back into our Nginx file that we created previously. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, if you don't find an HTML file, then let's look for an HTML file. And once again, you have to remember you need to reload this as well, but it's good practice to check that everything is okay. And so we can say sudo nginx-s reload once again. Everything is fine. And now we're going to say curl localhost, and you can see that it still says hello world. So let's now move the HTML file, and we're going to call it alt. Whoops. And now we'll run it again. And as you can see, we get hello world from legacy HTML, because let's go back into this file, because it looked, first of all, do you have an index.html file within inside of that HTML directory? And it said no. Okay, so it moved on to the next one, and it said, hey, I do have this one, and I'm going to return this by default, which is exactly what happened. All right, so that's basically the first part of it. Now, there are other ways of doing this. If there is another file, for example, if we want to have a look at index.html, we can see that it says not found, right? Because it doesn't exist. But we renamed it to old. So now if we say curl index.html old, you can see that it manages to find it. So this is all based upon it's looking directly in that one folder to see whether this file exists. So let's come back to our default.conf. And so what's happening here is that in the root directory, whenever it gets a request, what it's essentially saying is, okay, if it gets a request of a /, which it normally does, then it's going to say, hey, look in var www.html and see whether index.html exists, right? And then if it doesn't exist, it's going to say, hey, look to see whether HTML exists. And now if we, for example, said profile, right, in the thing. So if we said curl localhost profile, what's going to happen here? Well, it's first of all going to come to the HTML directory as we previously discussed. And now it's saying, hey, profile. So this is meaning, do you have a profile directory in there? So it's going to see, do I have that directory? And it's going to go, no, I don't have that directory. But if it does have that directory, then it's going to go into that directory and it's going to look for the index.html once again. And it's going to follow the same rules once again for the index of all folders. Now, if it doesn't have this profile directory, this is where we want to tell it what to show. And we can say equals 404. And this is a default file that Nginx has, and it's going to show this 404 file. So if we say localhost /profile, it doesn't have this folder, so it's going to come back. It's going to come back with a 404, right? But if it does have it, it's going to begin the same treatment once again. Look for the index.html files. So let's refresh this now, or reload this by saying nginx-t to check everything is okay, and then -s and say reload. And now let's come here once again, and we'll actually run this request and say localhost profile. It says 404 not found. So let's now make that directory, right? And we run the request once again, and it says moved permanently, right? This is really interesting now. So let's run the curl request with -v. So we want to see some more information. And you can see that the request went to get profile, and it then moved permanently. So it said, hey, I've got this file. I found this one folder, right? So it means I'm going to move and I'm going to check to see whether it's got an index file. So now the request that it's making is then profile / once again, but it doesn't find the file, right? But what we need to do is say, hey, follow any other we need to say to curl follow any 301s, right? And it comes here and it says 403 forbidden, right? Now if we just get rid of the v once again, it says 403 forbidden. Now this is because there is not a file inside of this folder, right? So let's just say index.html here, and we'll say profile page. and we run the request once again, and now we get profile page because it found that index.html. Let's move that index.html to be index.htm, and we still get the same page, right? But if we move the index.htm to be then index.php, and we run it again, we see we get forbidden once again because we didn't add the PHP index, or the index.php, to the index that we talked about shortly ago. Let's come back to our file. And yeah, we didn't add index.php to this. We just said, hey, go straight to a 404. So this is showing you the basics. Now there is something else that we could talk about called the location block, but I think that's enough for this one tutorial. Okay, I hope this has been enough. I will do some more videos about the basic configurations, but I think this was more than enough for the first video. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below. If I went too fast, too slow, or whatever, give me some feedback and I can go from there to make a new video. Otherwise, thanks very much for watching, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.